The theoretical essence of the state is often ignored by the masses, even if it's something imposed upon us, since we live under statist societies and have been since the formation of the world's first civilizations, and what we now refer to as Mesopotamia and Egypt. It would make sense to start focusing on the philosophical nature of the state as a political institution or set of institutions, whether this leads one to anarchism, or fascism, or the liberal conception of the state. At least it dives into the formation, organization, and purpose the state plays, both in the ancient world and the contemporary era. Since we live under capitalist liberalism, us folks in the Western world, the analysis of the capitalist liberal state is quite simple. Karl Marx and many anarchists have assessed sadism's nature very much accurately. It's an evil machine which exists to oppress the working class, by permitting the bourgeoisie into power, and now keeping the bourgeoisie in power, so that it can suck away the blood of the proletariat, like a Semitic vampire. This is absolute fact, and the only instrument which continues the despotism of the capitalist mode of production. However, the liberal state is something we're used to. Think of it as committing even more despotism than merely that of capitalism, forcing different incompatible racial groups to associate, as opposed to subsist independently, maintaining a parliamentary system where people vote for rulers, not for rules, so they are essentially just living under electoral dictatorship, and so on. Liberalism has created the illusion of freedom. Modernist, multicultural, multiracialism is by no means liberty. Nobody asked for this, nobody consented to this. As opposed to critiquing the liberal vision of the state, since well I already did it in another video, I'm going to elaborate upon positive views of the state. Not positive views of the capitalist liberal state, but the ones that are indeed antithetical to this tyrannical political organization of humanity. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the role the state plays in the political philosophies of fascism and National Socialism. There are two main elements to this. The first is how the state in these ideologies differs from that of liberalism, how it seeks to maintain order and organize society, in opposition to the bourgeois parliamentary productions of modernity. Secondly, in regards to fascist and National Socialist views, an examination of the state's human spirit must be undertaken. I shall make clear distinctions between the two, the idea of the state in fascism and National Socialism, and place emphasis on the soul of the state, what lies beyond policies, and has everything to do with sensibility. Giovanni Gentile makes it clear that, in keeping with the fascist conception of liberty, the organic state in fascism is one which is able to liberate all its national citizens, as long as they cooperate through the utilization of their minds, that their consciousness animates new improved realities for everyone. The fascist state is not opposed to freedom, on the contrary, it helps men and women become better versions of themselves, to abandon their hideous, degenerative behaviors, former slaves to their biology, since there was no one to prevent them from wasting their lives away. Is part of the national collective, an organism which is all-embracing, and surrounds them constantly in conditions of a spiritual society. They have certain obligations to the community, just as the community has certain obligations to them. Their life, their activities, their labor, is all for their society at large, the wider population, and not just themselves. This is because, from the idealist framework of existence, living individuals are inseparable from one another, since all are dependent upon the collective consciousness of a nation's citizens in order to continue subsisting in a realm of realness. Thus, the state, too, is just another part of you. You are the state is you, because the state functions in accordance with the universal spiritual will of those governed by it. It moves, shapes, and forms in response, gaining its personality from the personalities of those it's incorporated into its political body. Giovanni Gentile elaborates upon this, contrasting it with liberal ideas of how the state should operate. If liberty is to be the attribute of the real man, and not a scarecrow invented by the individualistic liberalism, then fascism is for liberty. It is for the only kind of liberty that is serious, for liberty of the state, of the individual in the state. Because for the state, all is comprised in the state, and nothing spiritual or human exists, much less has any value outside the state. In this respect, fascism is a totalizing concept, and the fascist state, the unification and synthesis of every value, interprets, develops, and potentiates the whole life of the people. No individuals nor groups, political parties, associations, labor unions, classes outside the state. For this reason, fascism is opposed to socialism, which clings rigidly to class war and the heroic evolution and ignores the unity of the state which molds the classes into a single moral and economic reality. In the same way, fascism is opposed to the unions of the laboring classes, but within the orbit of the state, with ordinate functions, the real needs which give rise to the socialist movement and to the forming of labor unions are emphatically recognized by fascism and are given their full expression in the cooperative system, which coordinates every interest in the unity of the state. Individuals form classes according to categories of interests. They are associated according to differentiated economical activities, which have a common interest. But first and foremost, they form the state. The state is not merely either the number or the sum of individuals forming the majority of the people. Fascism, for this reason, is opposed to the democracy, which identifies peoples with the greatest number of individuals and reduces them to majority level. But if people are conceived as they should be qualitatively and not quantitatively, then fascism is democracy in its purest form. The quantitative conception is the most coherent and truest form, and is therefore the most moral, because it sees the people realized in the consciousness and will of the few, or even of only one, an ideal which moves to its realization in the consciousness and will of all. By all is meant all who derive their justification as a nation, ethically speaking, from their nature and history, and who follow the same line of spiritual formation and development as one single will and consciousness, not as a race nor as a geographically determined region, but as a progeny that is rather the outcome of a history which perpetuates itself, a multitude unified by an idea embodied in the will to have power and to exist, conscious of itself and of its personality. The higher personality is truly the nation, insomuch as it is the state. The nation does not beget the state, according to the Skrepic nationalistic concept, which is used as a basis for the publicists of the national state in the 19th century. On the contrary, the nation is created by the state, which gives the people conscious of their own moral unity, the will, and thereby an effective existence. The right of a nation to its independence is derived not from a literary and ideal consciousness of its own existence, much as from a de facto situation, more or less inert and unconscious, but from an active consciousness, from an active political will disposed to demonstrate in its right, that is to say, a kind of state already in its pride, inferior. The state, in fact, as universal ethical will, is the creator of right. So, in case you don't know, Giovanni Gentili is talking about the idea of what we call legal positivism. And by that, we were talking about the fact that the state is the only thing which can really grant you rights. You can't have rights outside the state, as alternative theories, predominantly promoted by anarchists and liberals like natural law, would have it. They don't believe in natural law because there is inherent collectivism through the community, through the larger people, that you have to have in fascism in order to really have any liberty. Hence, legal positivism and not legal naturalism. The nation as a state is an ethical reality which exists and lives in measure as it develops, and stands still as its death. Therefore, the state is not only the authority which governs and which gives the forms of law and the worth of the spiritual life to the individual wills, but it is also the power which gives effect to its will in foreign matters, causing it to be recognized and respected by demonstrating through facts the universality of all the manifestations necessary for its development. Hence, it is organization as well as expansion, and may be thereby considered, at least vertically, equal to the very nature of the human will, which in its evolution recognizes no barriers, which realizes itself by providing its infinity. The fascist state, the highest and the most powerful form of personality, is a force, but a spiritual one. It reassumes all the forms of the moral and intellectual life of man. It cannot, therefore, be limited to a simple function of order and of safeguarding, as was contended by liberalism. It is not a simple mechanism, which limits the sphere of the presumed individual liberties. It is an eternal form and rule, a discipline of the entire people. It penetrates the will as well as the intelligence. Its principle, essential inspiration of the living human personality in the civil community, descends into the depths and settles in the heart of the man of action, as well as the thinker, of the artist as well as the scientist, the soul of our soul. The spirit of the people, not any singular person, but every interest group, all collectives in connection with the state, join hands through their joined imagination to give the corporate estate a spiritual integral character, a faith which allows for mere individuals to be eradicated and instead replaced with something much more beautiful, a flesh and blood team, unified and strong, working together as one to advance their common causes. And now to hear from fascist theoretician Alfredo Rocco on the importance of the absolute state within fascism. Alfredo Rocco states, "The liberals insist that the best manner to secure the welfare of the citizens as individuals is to intervene as little as possible with the free development of their activities, and that, therefore, the essential task of the state is merely to coordinate these several liberties in such a way as to guarantee their coexistence. Kant, who was without doubt the most powerful and true philosopher of liberalism, said, "Man, who is the end, cannot be assumed to have the value of an instrument." And again, justice, of which the state is a specific organ, is a condition whereby the freedom of each is conditioned upon the freedom of others, according to the general law of liberty. Having thus defined the task of the state, liberalism confines itself to the demand of certain guarantees, which are to keep the state from overstepping its functions as general coordinators of liberty, and from sacrificing the freedom of individuals more than is absolutely necessary for the accomplishment of its purpose. All the efforts are therefore directed to see to it that the ruler mandatory of all are entrusted with the realization, true and by liberty, of the harmonious happiness of everyone, should never be clothed with undue power. Hence the creation of a system of checks and limitations designed to keep the rules within bounds. And among these, first and foremost, the principle of the division of powers, contrived as a means for weakening the state in its relation to the individual, making it impossible for the state ever to appear in its dealings with citizens in the full of plenitude of sovereignty powers. Also the principle of the participation of citizens in the law-making power, as the strongest branch, is a means of securing on behalf of the individual a direct check on this, the strongest branch, and an indirect check on the entire government of the state. This system of checks and limitations, where it goes by the name of constitutional government, resulted in moderate and measured liberalism. The checking power was exercised only by those citizens who were deemed worthy and capable, with the result that a small elite was made to represent legally the entire body politic for whose benefit this regime was instituted. It was evident, however, that this moderate system, being fundamentally logical and in contradiction with the very principles from which it proceeded, would soon become the object of serious criticism. For if the object of society and of the state is the welfare of individuals, severely considered, how is it possible to admit that this welfare can be secured by the individuals themselves only through the possibilities of such a liberal regime? The inequalities brought about by both nature and by social organization are so numerous and so serious that, for the greatest part, individuals abandoned to themselves not only would fail to obtain happiness, but would also contribute to the perpetration of their condition of misery and dejection. The state, therefore, cannot limit itself to merely negative function of the defense of liberty. It must become active in behalf of everyone for the welfare of the people. It must intervene when necessary in order to improve the material, intellectual, and moral conditions of the masses. It must find work for the unemployed, instruct and educate the people, and care for health and hygiene. For if the purpose of society and the state is the welfare of individuals, if it is just that these individuals themselves control the attainment of their needs, it becomes difficult to understand why liberalism should not go the whole distance, why it should see fit to distinguish certain individuals from the rest of the mass, and why the function of the people should be restricted to the exercise of a mere check. Therefore, the state, if it exists for all, must be governed by all, and not by a small minority. If the state is for the people, sovereignty must reside in the people. If all individuals have the right to govern the state, liberty is no longer sufficient. Equality must be added, and if sovereignty is vested in the people must weigh all sovereignty and not merely a part of it. The people to check out and curb the government is not sufficient. The people must be the government. Thus, logically developed, liberalism leads to democracy, for democracy contains the problems of liberalism, but oversteps its limitations in that it makes the action of the state positive, proclaims the equality of all citizens through the dogma of popular sovereignty. Democracy, therefore, necessarily implies a republican form of government, even though at times, for reasons of expediency, it temporarily adjusts itself to a monarchical regime. Fascism replaces, therefore, the old atomistic and mechanical state theory, which was at the basis of the liberal and democratic doctrines, with an organic and historical concept. When I say organic, I do not wish to convey the impression that I consider society as an organism after the manner of the so-called organic theories of the state, but rather to indicate that the social groups, as fractions of the species, receive thereby a life and scope which transcend the scope of life of the individuals and defending themselves with the history and finalities of the uninterrupted series of generations. It is irrelevant in this connection to determine whether social groups considered as factions of the species constitute organisms. The important thing is to ascertain that this organic concept of the state gives to society a continuous life over and beyond the existence of the several individuals. The relation, therefore, between state and citizen are completely reversed by the fascist doctrine. Instead of the liberal democratic formula, society for the individual, we have individuals for society. With this difference, however, that while the liberal doctrine eliminates society, fascism does not submerge the individual in the social group. It subordinates him, but does not eliminate him, the individual as a part of his generation, ever remaining as an element of society, however transient and insignificant he may be. Moreover, the development of individuals in each generation, when coordinated and harmonized, conditions of the development of prosperity of the entire social unit. In this junction, the antithesis between the two theories must appear complete and absolute. Liberalism, democracy, and socialism look upon social groups as aggregates of living individuals. For fascism, they are the re-perpetuating unity of the indefinite series of generations. For liberalism, society has no purposes other than those of the members living at a given moment. For fascism, society has historical and immediate ends of preservation, expansion, improvement, quite distinct from those of the individuals which at a given moment compose it, so distinct in fact that they may even be in opposition, hence the necessity for which the older doctrines make little allowance of sacrifice, even up to the total emulation of individuals in behalf of society, hence the true explanation of war, eternal law of mankind, interpreted by the liberal democratic doctrines as a degenerate absurdity or as a maddened monstrosity. For liberalism, society has no life distinct from the life of the individuals, or as the phrase goes, solvitur in singularities. For fascism, the life of society overlaps the existence of individuals and projects itself into the succeeding generations through centuries, millennium. Individuals come into being, grow and die, followed by others unceasingly. Social unity remains always identical to itself. For liberalism, the individual is the end and society the means, nor is it conceivable that the individual, considered in the dignity of an ultimate finality, be lowered to mere instrumentality. For fascism, society is the end, individuals the means, and its whole life consists in using individuals as instruments for its social ends. The state therefore guards and protects the welfare and development of individuals, not for their exclusive interest, but because of the identity of the needs of individuals with those of society as a whole. We can thus accept and explain institutions and practices, which, like the death penalty, are condemned by liberalism in the name of the preeminence of individualism. Alfredo Rocco's idea of the state is one that attaches collectives and the state in emphasizing their harmonious relationships, as to make them dependent upon one another, because the limited liberal state, he states, doesn't work in favor of the people it rules over, since people don't demand moderation. In truth, the people want serious change, not a continuation of the current system. Unlike liberalism and its cursed offspring, conservatism, the fascist state is unbound, unrestricted, for the sake of the people, not in separating those in power from those apparently without power, but instead by saying through the will created by consciousness that since the people are the state, they thus control the state, whether or not they're aware of this fact, because in liberalism, the state has limits, is unable to perform certain actions due to constitutional restraints. The people, through their consciousness, no matter their will attempting to alter the events of the present, the law ceases to sway, to alter in realistic accordance with that of those abiding by it. Outside the sphere of the state, no true ethics, spirits, or organization can occur, for the state is, in fascism, a corporative body, which carries the weight of all its nationals, whether their good or bad behaviors and actions, and directs them to a vision of prosperity they're unable to view on their own. Without a state, a people are lost, just as a child is lost without their parents, for they need to fall under a corporate platform in order to be guided throughout their life. And the liberal state, the thing is, in its historical existence, and the reason it exists now, is not to help the people, because it doesn't really want to intervene that much, in the sense that it would actually benefit the people. No, it wants to exist to take from the people, but never actually give anything back. hence its promotion and support of capitalism, because it wants one class to rule over and oppress another. But in the fascist state, it doesn't seek, the fascist state that is, to create all these antagonistic relationships, all these dynamics that don't benefit anybody. In the fascist state, on the contrary, and even though not everyone is considered equal, it's not an egalitarian doctrine by any means, it does see everyone as one extended family, linked spiritually, and seeks to coordinate them for their best interests, to help the people. The people aren't helping the state is helping the people. But of course, state and individual are one, so everyone is helping themselves by subscription to this one centralized organism known as the state. Now, with this out of the way, let's examine the essence of, and role played, by the state in National Socialism. Adolf Hitler, in his book Mein Kampf, talks at length at the necessity of the National Socialist state serving that of the racial Volk. He states, "The current political conception of the world is that the state, though it possesses a creative force which can build up civilizations, has nothing in common with the concept of race as the foundation of the state. The state is considered rather as something which has resulted from economic necessity, or at best, the natural outcome of the play of political forces and impulses. Such a conception of the foundations of the state, together with all its logical consequences, not only ignores the remedial racial forces that underlie the state, but it also leads to a policy in which the importance of the individual is minimized. If it be denied that races differ from one another in their powers of cultural creativeness, then this same horrendous notion must necessarily influence our estimation of the value of the individual. The assumption that all races are alike leads to the assumption that nations and individuals are equal to one another. The fundamental principle is that the state is not an end in itself, but the means to an end. It is the preliminary condition under which alone a higher form of human civilization can be developed, but it is not the source of such a development. It is to be sought exclusively in the actual existence of a race which is endowed with the gift of cultural creativeness. There may be hundreds of excellent states on this earth, and yet if the Aryan, who is the creator and customan of civilization, should disappear, all culture that is on an adequate level with the spiritual needs of the superior nations today would also disappear. We may go still further and say that the fact that the states have been created by human beings does not in the least exclude the possibility that the human race may become extinct, because the superior intellectual faculties and powers of adoption will be lost when the racial barrier of these faculties and powers disappeared. It is not the state as such that brings about a certain definite advance in cultural progress. The state can only protect the race that is the cause of such progress. The state as such may well exist without undergoing any change for hundreds of years, though the cultural faculties in the general life of the people, which is shaped by these faculties, may have suffered profound changes, by reason of the fact that the state did not prevent a process of racial mixture from taking place. The present state, for instance, may continue to exist in a mere mechanical form, but the poison of miscegenation permeating the national body brings about a cultural decadence, which manifests itself already in various symptoms that are of a detrimental character. Thus, the indispensable prerequisite for the existence of superior quality of human beings is not the state but the race, which is alone capable of producing that higher human quality. The state is only a means to an end. Its end and its purpose is to preserve and promote a community of human beings which are physically as well as spiritually kindred. Above all, it must preserve the existence of the race, thereby providing the indispensable condition for the free development of all the forces dormant in the race. A great part of these faculties will always have to be employed in the first place to maintain the physical existence of the race, and only a small portion will be free to work in the field of intellectual progress. But as a matter of fact, the one is always a necessary counterpart of the other. Those states which do not serve this purpose have no justification for their existence. They are monstrosities. The fact that they do exist is no more of a justification than the successful raids carried out by bands of pirates can be considered a justification of piracy. We National Socialists who are fighting for a new... I really, for the life of me, couldn't pronounce that word. Must never take our stand on the famous basis of facts, and especially not on mistaken facts. If we did so, we should cease to be the protagonists of a new and great idea, and we become slaves in the service of the fallacy which is dominated today. We must make a clear-cut distinction between the vessel and its contents. The state is only the vessel, and the race is what it contains. The vessel can have a meaning only if it preserves and safeguards the contents. Otherwise, it is useless. Hence, the supreme purpose of the ethical state is to guard and preserve those racial elements which, through their work in the cultural field, create that beauty and dignity which are characteristic of higher mankind. As Aryans, we can consider the state only as the living organism of a people, an organism which does not merely maintain the existence of a people, but functions in such a way as to lead its people to a position of supreme liberty by the progressive development of the intellectual and cultural faculties. What they want to impose upon us as a state today is in most cases nothing but a monstrosity, the product of a profound human aberration which brings untold suffering in its train. We National Socialists know that in holding these views, we take up a revolutionary stand in the world of today, and that we are branded as revolutionaries. But our views and our conduct will not be determined by the approbation or disapprobation of our contemporaries, but only by our duty to follow a truth which we have acknowledged. In doing this, we have reason to believe that posterity will have a clearer insight, and will not only understand the work we are doing today, but will also ratify it as the right work and will exalt it accordingly. On these principles, we National Socialists base our stance of value in apprising a state. This value will be relative when viewed from the particular standpoint of the individual nation, but it will be absolute when considered from the standpoint of humanity as a whole. In other words, this means that the excellence of a state can never be judged by the level of its culture or the degree of importance which the outside world attracts to its power, but that its excellence must be judged by the degree of which its institutions serve the racial stock which belongs to it. A state may be considered as a model example if it adequately serves not only the vital needs of the racial stock it represents, but if it actually assures it, by its own existence, the preservation of this same racial stock. No matter what general cultural significance this statical institution may have in the eyes of the rest of the world. For it is not the task of the state to create human capabilities, but only to assure free scope for the exercise of capabilities that already exist. On the other hand, a state may be called bad if, in spite of the existence of a high cultural level, it dooms to destruction the bearers of the culture, breaking out their racial uniformity. For the practical effect of such a policy would be to destroy those conditions that are indispensable for the interior existence of the culture, which the state did not create but which is the fruit of the created people inherent in the racial stock, whose existence is assured by being united in the living organism of the state. Once again, let me emphasize the fact that the state itself is not the substance but the form. Therefore, the cultural level is not the standard by which we can judge the value of the state in which the people lives. It is evident that a people which is endowed with high creative powers in the cultural sphere is of more worth than a tribe of... moving on from that. And yet, the settled organization of the former, if judged from the standpoint of efficiency, may be worse than that of the... Not even the best of states and statical institutions can evolve faculties from people which they lack and which they never possessed, but a bad state may gradually destroy the faculties which once existed. This it can do by allowing or favoring the suppression of those who are the bearers of a racial culture. Therefore, the worth of a state can be determined only by asking how far it actually succeeds in promoting the well-being of a definite race, and not by the role which it plays in the world at large. Its relative worth can be estimated readily and accurately, but it's difficult to judge its absolute worth because the latter is conditioned not only by the state but also by the quality and cultural level of the people that belongs to the individual state in question. Therefore, when we speak of the high mission of the state, we must not forget that the high mission belongs to the people, that the business of the state is to use its organizing power for the purpose of furnishing the necessary conditions which allow this people freely to unfold its creative faculties. If we ask what kind of statical institution we Germans need, we must first have a clear notion as to the people which the state must embrace, what purpose it may serve. A folk state should in the first place raise matrimony from the level of being a constant scandal. The state should consecrate it as an institution which is called upon to produce creatures made in the likeness of the Lord, and not create monsters that are a mixture of man and ape. The protest which is put forward in the name of humanity does not fit the mouth of a generation that makes it possible for the most depraved degenerates to propagate themselves, thereby imposing unspeakable suffering on their own products and their contemporaries. On the other hand, contraceptives are permitted and sold in every drugstore and even by street hawkers, so that the baby should not be born even among the healthiest of our people. In this present state of ours, whose function is to be the guardian of peace and good order, our national bourgeoisie looks upon it as a crime to make procreation impossible for syphilitics and those who suffer from tuberculosis or other hereditary diseases, also cripples and imbeciles. But the practical prevention of procreation among millions of our very best people is not considered as an evil, nor does it defend against the noble morality of this social class, but rather encourages their short-sightedness and mental lethargy. For otherwise, they would at least stir their brains to find an answer to the question of how to create conditions for the feeding and maintaining of those future beings who will be the healthy representatives of our nation, must also provide the conditions of which the generation that is to follow them will have to support itself and live. In this field, the people state will have to repair the damage that arises from the fact that the problem is at present neglected by all the various parties concerned. It was the task of the people state to make the race the center of the life of the community. It must make sure that the purity of the racial strain will be preserved. It must proclaim the truth that the child is the most valuable possession a people can have. The state that is grounded on the racial principles and is alive to the significance of this truth will first of all have to bear its educational work not on the mere imparting of knowledge, but rather on physical training and development of healthy bodies. The cultivation of the intellectual faculties comes only in the second place. And here again, it is character which has to be developed first of all, strength of will and decision. And the educational system ought to foster the spirit of readiness to accept responsibilities gladly. Formal instruction in these sciences must be considered last in importance. Accordingly, the state which is grounded on the racial idea must start with the principle that a person whose formal education is in the sciences is relatively small but who is physically sound and robust, of a steadfast and honest character, ready and able to make decisions and endowed with a strength of will, is a more useful member of the national community than a weakling who is scholarly and refined. A nation composed of learned men who are physical weakenings, hesitant about decisions of the will and timid pacifists, is not capable of assuring even its own existence on this earth. In the bitter struggle which decides the destiny of man, it is very rare that an individual has succumbed because he lacked learning. Those who fail are they who try to ignore these consequences and are too faint-hearted about putting them into effect. There must be a certain balance between mind and body. An ill-kept body is not made a more beautiful sight, but the indwelling of a radiant spirit. We should not be acting justly if we were to bestow the highest intellectual training on those who are physically deformed and crippled, who lack decision and are weak-willed, cowardly. What has made the Greek ideal of beauty immortal is the wonderful union of a splendid physical beauty with nobility of mind and spirit. So, to put it all into perspective, first I'm going to compare the fascist and national socialist state in comparison to the liberal one. The liberal state, unlike the fascist and national socialist state, is one with obvious limits, i.e. constitutional restraints. For example, I live in Australia, and here we have a constitutional monarchy, which is practically the same thing as a representative democracy. In fact, I don't actually know the difference aside from the fact that we're governed by the Queen of England, and she doesn't even do anything. The fascist and national socialist states, however, are absolute, meaning autocratic. In fascism, it may appear this is a dictatorship, but because of the universal will of the state's subjects, calls it to pass laws or repeal laws, to legalize, criminalize, stay isolationist, or go to war, is actually a pure democracy due to the collective consciousness of all its conceivers admitting its movement. And for the National Socialist state, unlike its liberal opposite, it subsists to represent that of the racial Volk, not some false egalitarian notion of strength in diversity. Instead, strength in the pride of one's ancestral people. The liberal state's existence is to secure that of capitalism, to keep the capitalists in power. Well, to have put them in power to begin with. Statism needs to rear its ugly head, and prop up a decadent ruling class who steals away the wealth the working laborers have created, privatizing their material creations and energies. The fascist and national socialist states, on the contrary, are opposed to this neoliberalism. Not just contemporary liberalism in its economic sense, but cultural sense, created and sustained through capitalistic economics. It is against bourgeois society in all its aspects, its rationalistic, materialistic, positivistic, and all metaphysical abstractions, innovations of the late 18th century, with the European Enlightenment and French Revolution. The fascist and national socialist states are traditionalists and therefore recognize that capitalism is one of the most evil, well, the singular most evil, productions of modernity. They are corporatist in nature, in which state-owned guild associations attach themselves and indirectly manage different sections of labor, in order to protect workers from the clutches of privatized despotism. The liberal state is modernist, while the fascist and National Socialist states are traditionalist. The family, the culture, the race for National Socialism, and the nation state, Fascism and National Socialism represents a turning tide away from the development of the late 18th century, and instead draws all nationals toward a new destiny where they become part of something larger than merely themselves, a unified, heroic collective. The liberal state is one that concerns itself only with liberty, but never delivers, due to its obsession with oppressing and impoverishing workers, true bourgeois authority. Now, we're going to compare the state within fascism and National Socialism and see whether they differ from one another. The state in National Socialism is a means to an end, meaning it doesn't exist for its own sake, but instead is dependent upon the racial bulk of society in order to continue its existence. The racial bulk, whether within or outside the sphere of the state, still exist, dwell on earth as a fact. But when brought under the heel of the state, they're able to be organized for the sake of furthering their own interests. By their own interests, what's not being referred to here is selfish, egoistic wants and needs of a single individual or a few individuals, but the whole interest group. The race is able to succeed under a corporative body, that of the state, since the state pulls them together tightly in order to secure their futures. The fascist state, on the contrary, doesn't limit itself to a select ethnic or racial group, or set of groups, because it seeks to be universal, hence its advocacy and tendency to expand, to imperialize, so that all people on all continents will fall under its grasp. The life of the state is dependent upon the life of its subjects, but unlike the National Socialist, state cannot exist merely because the politicians running it claim it does. It needs to be believed in, and it can't do that when the state and nation only serve the interests of a particular race, meaning such a race acts as a vessel to fill the pot. I remember when I was a white nationalist, I didn't care about the nation in the slightest. The nation was only promoted because it was an easy location and political entity which could expel ancestral foreigners and maintain racial homogeny. The state in National Socialism is not, in the same way fascism is, an organism, as in a set of interconnected parts, functioning together as one in syndicated fashion for the sake of a common goal, all or most of a nation's subjects share. The fascist state is organic, not meaning natural, since it is a construction, in the sense that it is predicted growth of imagination on the part of citizens. The state will change, the nation as well, when people themselves change. But on the contrary, with National Socialism, the will alter, sway when the state itself morphs into something else. In Germany, when Adolf Hitler was elected into office, the people who voted for him saw him as no different than most of the fellow nationalist candidates and really a right-wing alternative to the Marxist and social democratic politicians vying for political control of the German state. Benito Mussolini was different in the fact that he was a revolutionary nationalist, and following the March on Rome, entered into parliament illegally, an overthrow of a liberal Italy. In Germany, the people changed because of Adolf Hitler and his new government. In Italy, the people had willed Mussolini into power, not through voting, but through their desires for an alteration to the liberalism which had swept throughout their nation. The overthrow was already in their minds prior to the actual fascist revolution itself. It was true that the Weimar Republic was overwhelmed with degeneracy, that of liberalized modernity and Jewish capitalism, but the German people weren't particularly nationalistic, for it was more or less the Great Depression, economic anxiety, which caused most of the distress, with the Germans turning to Hitler as a savior from this crisis. Though in both fascism and National Socialism, the dictators residing of such states are populist in their politics and character, the fascist leader attempts to conform to the sensibilities, attitudes, personalities, and beliefs of their national citizens, while, on the other hand, the National Socialist leader desires their national citizens to conform to their spirit, to serve as an example of a person somebody should be. This doesn't disqualify the concept of a new man in fascist Italy, however. The new man emerges as a continual process in the evolution of the fascist state, for the fascist state matures with time, thus expectedly, its citizens do as well. Regardless of which ideology we choose between fascism and National Socialism, there is a larger respect for the state than what exists in the contemporary era, because both faiths seek to bring back the state collectivism prevalent in the true right, in the traditionalist reaction to modernity, to that created and spread through liberalism. And yes, I would largely refer these systems, if ever implemented in the modern world, to liberal variants of governance. Of course, fascism has many adaptations, spanning across every continent, so it's naturally going to be a bit different each time. But the central theoretical basis of fascism is that united, we are strong.